Mexico City. A powerful earthquake struck Mexico on Tuesday afternoon, toppling buildings, rattling the capital and sending people flooding into the streets for the second time in just 2 weeks. By night, nearly 140 people had been reported killed across the country, including scores in the state of Morelos, close to the epicenter of the quake, and dozens here in the capital, Mexico City. But the figure was expected to climb, especially because rescuers were still frantically digging out people trapped beneath mounds of rubble. The earthquake hit shortly after 1 p.m. about 100 miles from Mexico City. It registered a preliminary magnitude of 7.1, causing heavy and prolonged shaking in the capital. More than 40 buildings and other structures in Mexico City collapsed, including at least 2 schools, officials said, crushing cars and trapping some people inside. Emergency workers and ordinary citizens raced to the site of downed office and apartment buildings, lifting rubble with their hands in an attempt to free anyone stuck underneath. Tuesday's earthquake struck on the 32nd anniversary of another major disaster, the 1985 quake that killed as many as 10,000 people in Mexico. It also came less than 2 weeks after the most powerful earthquake in Mexico in a century, an 8.1 magnitude quake that killed at least 90 people, destroyed thousands of homes and was felt by tens of millions of people. Residents in Mexico City, having just experienced shaking from that quake, said the tremors on Tuesday were far worse. "It's like Sodom and Gomorrah, like God is angry at us," said Jorge Ortiz Diaz, 66, a government employee who was assisting with the rescues on Tuesday, his eyes filling with tears. "Now is the moment when solidarity begins." In parts of the city, the wreckage was evident immediately, including damage to the main airport. Shattered glass and the splintered edges of buildings spilled onto sidewalks. Nearly all residents of the capital remained outside even after the shaking had faded, fearful of returning to their buildings. In the neighborhood of Roma Norte, an entire office building collapsed. Rescuers scrambled to save people caught in the rubble. Several of the injured were whisked away in ambulances. Others lay on the ground covered in dust. An unknown number remained trapped or crushed inside. Talia Hernandez, 28, was on the second floor of the building, taking a tattoo class. When the earthquake hit and tore through the structure, she said, she rolled down the stairs as they were collapsing. She managed to escape the building but broke her foot. "I can't believe I'm alive," she said, weeping and in shock as medics pulled shards of glass from her foot. Ms. Hernandez said other people had also managed to flee, but even the perimeter of the building remained dangerous. The heavy smell of leaking gas permeated the air, as it did across damaged parts of the city. Emergency personnel at the scene were pushing bystanders away, fearing an explosion. The scene was cordoned off, and the injured were being carted away on gurneys and placed in ambulances. The building itself was unrecognizable, it had fallen entirely. The rubble, a brown-colored cement, rose nearly 20 feet high. The neighboring building was partly torn in the collapse as well. Angela Cota, 52, an administrative secretary who worked in the building on the first floor, said that just as she and others were fleeing, parts of the building fell around them. They, too, managed to get out, but it was unclear how many people remained stuck beneath the rubble. Gabriela Hernandez, 28, lay on a gurney, covered in blood and nearly speechless. Her boyfriend stood beside her, clutching her bag. The blood was not hers, they said, it belonged to someone who had fallen on top of her when the building went down. She said she had been on the 6th floor when it happened, yet managed to escape. The scene grew frantic as dozens of medical workers, police officers and firefighters shouted to see what people needed. They were hastily trying to make a pulley system to free people still trapped near the top of the rubble heap. Construction workers from a nearby site raced to the scene and lined up to help, bearing long wooden poles to help lift pieces of the structure. Buildings also collapsed across the neighborhood of Condesa, another fashionable district in the city constructed atop soft soil and extremely vulnerable to earthquakes. Outside, thousands and thousands stood in the streets, avenues and sidewalks, filling the popular neighborhood with a sense of dread. On Laredo Street, an entire 8-story apartment building had fallen into the road, leaving an enormous heap of concrete and rubble pouring into the street. At least 100 people stood atop the pile, clearing it by hand, piece by piece, passing boulders and twisted steel pipes along a human chain that radiated from the heap like spokes. The sound of shouts filled the air, men barking orders at one another.